A message from our sponsor, Ramp Stop Marine Service. Ramp Stop Marine Service is a family-owned and operated boat store located at mile marker 757 on the Ohio River. Since 2005, their mission has been to support and encourage the inland mariner by providing midstream delivery services on the Ohio River from Louisville to Cairo and the Mississippi from Hickman to Cape Girardeau. By operating their own grocery store and supply warehouse tailored to the needs of vessels operating on our inland rivers, they can provide you with what your boats and crews need to keep moving. Ramp Stop has also begun working with launch services and midstream fuelers on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So next time you talk with your launch service or midstream fueler, ask if they can provide you with groceries from Ramp Stop Marine Service. Check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, or visit www.rampstop.com. I am joined today for a fourth or fifth time by Captain Coy Lawrence. We've tried this a few times before, but some technical difficulties on my end have messed that up. We have Collins Reese to thank for this meeting and Turbo Hughes for making the connection. Captain Coy, thank you very much for joining me yet again.
Thanks for having me again, Tim. I appreciate it.
Well, you know the drill. So let's start where it began. Where were you born, sir?
I was born in 1964 in Winfield, Louisiana.
Home of Huey P. Long.
Yes, sir.
And then
yes,
I
sir.
believe you weren't there for very long, though. You moved to Arkansas?
Yeah, well, we moved up to northern Louisiana in 1965, and we stayed there until 76. In 1976, we moved up to northern Arkansas.
And remind me, what did your parents do for a living?
My mom, at the time she met my dad, was a telephone operator, and my dad is a riverman. He spent his whole career on the river also. But mom done many jobs. She was a beautician for a while, and we owned a little country grocery store up. And when we moved to northern Louisiana, she ran a little country grocery store up there until we moved to Arkansas.
Was your father on the river when you were born?
Yes, my dad, I can't remember exactly when Dad went on the river. He was on the river when him and Mom met in 62. And he worked for a company called Hoagland Barge Line back in those days. And he was, he started out, of course, as a tankerman, deckhand tankerman back in the days, but he went on to get a steersman job and a pilot's job on the Jane Hoagland there with that barge line.
And I think you said you had a couple of uncles on the river as well.
Yeah, I had a Uncle Fred. He worked for Ingram and a lot on his last days. I think he worked on the OH Ingram or something like that. And he had I'm trying to say that he passed away in 1982. And then I had an uncle, Phil Milford. Most people knew him as Phil. He worked on the steamboat Delta Queen until his final days.
And what led them to the river? Was your grandfather an industry man?
No, it was all, my grandfather worked in the sawmill. He worked in the sawmill, but I guess my Uncle Fred will probably be the one that led off in the river career. He was the oldest son, and I guess Dad was the middle. No, Dad was the youngest. So Uncle Fred and Uncle Phil went on the river, and Dad just followed suit. And then several years later, I'm the last of them.
Well, walk me through your childhood then. What was it like growing up and eventually into Arkansas?
Well, northern Louisiana, we lived in a very small town. Just about the whole community. It's a little town called Spearsville, is where we grew up out of. But it was a big. Most of my mom and them's family was around there, and a bunch of big farms and stuff like that. But we grew up just like normal kids would. Family was a big deal down there. Family and church. our whole community really revolved around a little community church called Mountain Union Church. And I was grown up with a blessed childhood of a dad who liked to travel. Dad took us all over the country when we was kids. We loved traveling to the Smoky Mountains, and we spent a lot of time up here in a little amusement park that a lot of people wouldn't probably remember, but it was based on a Little Abner comic strip called Dog Patch USA, Little Abner and Daisy Mae. And we always came up to Arkansas a lot to the amusement park and stuff like that. And we loved the mountains and stuff. And later on, I guess that's what eventually led us up to this part of the country. We loved it up here and stuff. And when we decided to leave Louisiana, that's where, Dad decided we'd either move up here, or he really liked a place called Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. You probably heard of that, in the Smoky Mountains and stuff. And he gave Mom the choice, and we moved up here because on the weekends and stuff, we could still go back down and see the moms and family and stuff. We're about 5 or 6 hours north of where I grew up at. And we moved up here to Arkansas when I was 12, 1976. We moved up here. And again, with Dad being a riverman, working the 30 days on, 30 days off. By the time we moved up here, he had went to work for ARCO. He was a captain on the Sally Archer for about 20 years, 18, 20 years or something like that. So it was a 30-day on, 30-day off schedule. So of course, while he was at home, we traveled the country a lot. As a kid, I got to see a lot of the country that people never got to see, because we traveled all the time.
Did you have a chance growing up to get on a boat with him?
Yeah, sure did. I actually rode the Sally Archer with him. I've made a couple of trips with him before I came out on the river, but as a kid, it was interesting to me, but it was really never a career that I intended on going to. I thought I would lead towards other interests, but in the late 80s or early 80s, I graduated in 82, and the market for jobs just wasn't that great. And that's when I went to Dad and asked him, would he give him, could I get a temporary job on the river till I could find something else? And it's still temporary.
How many years later?
June will be 40 years.
Good for you. So walk me through, was college a consideration?
No, I like school all right, but when I got out of school, college never crossed my mind. I was ready to go into the job industry and make a life. I don't know why, but just school, when I got out of it, I was done with it.
Tell me about your time as a deckhand, getting on deck for the first time.
I started in, like I said, 1983, 18-year-old kid, first boat. I went on the Windy L for Mid-South Towing. It was a boat that they had just got. I'd put in an application in 80, I guess the fall of 82, I put in an application. And at that time, Mid-South only had 4 boats. They wasn't a real big company. And I think I've heard other people in the interviews and stuff say back in those days, Mid-South was the cream of the crop. It was the absolute best company on the river in just about anybody's opinion. And they had a stack of applications a mile high, and the only way that you could ever get a job there, somebody had to quit, die, or retire. And my dad actually worked with the port captain at the time's name was Leonard Wallington, a real nice guy. And Dad and him had worked together over at Hoagland Barge Line back in his dad's early career. And he called Leonard and asked him, would he give me a chance, Leonard at that time said he couldn't even give me a chance because, there just wasn't any job. But he said, be patient because they're coming out with some new boats. They got a contract with a company, Merchant Grain. Merchant Grain was the name of the company, and they're going to lease them some boats. And when the Windy L came out in the summer of 1983, I got on that boat brand new, just out of shipyard, and that was my first decking career. Quite interesting back in then, because, like I said, you got on the boat. Your training period was put on your boots, put on your gloves, grab you a cheater pipe, and we're going out on tow and work. And you didn't have no schooling, or you didn't have the training barges and stuff back in then to go to. Your training was the minute you stepped out on tow, they started teaching you how to tighten a ratchet, and that was your career. You followed the mate or the other deckhand around. They told you to jerk a wire or tighten a ratchet. That was your career, and you followed them around religiously until you really found out what you was doing.
Where were you running on that boat?
We ran from mostly from Paducah, Kentucky. The Mid-South office back in the 80s was in Paducah. They hadn't bought that land in Metropolis yet. And we ran from Paducah, Kentucky down to mile 55 on the lower down at Electro Coal Dock. And it was just about round trips. And every now and then we'd make a trip up to Green River up the Ohio. We'd go up there and get coal barges and come back out. And I stayed on that boat until they gave the boat back. It was a 5,600 horsepower, and it wasn't as big a boat as they wanted. They kept it about a year, I think, until, well, it's probably a little bit over the year, because the Nita M came out, and then the Karen J came out over that. So it was probably late 84 when I went on the Karen J came out of the shipyard there at St. Louis. And it was the last boat that was ever finished in St. Louis ship. And I guess Ingram still got it today. It's the Dave O. But that was always interesting to me, that, that was the boat that sort of finished out there in St. Louis. And I finished my decking career and got set up to second mate on that boat also. And, a bunch of the crew members and stuff I still remember, and a lot of them still work on the river today. Some of that very first crew I worked with is still some of the people that I keep in contact with today.
Were you making that same run on that second boat?
Yeah, we made the same run. It was until, we made the run, and even after I went to the boat that I ran first mate on, the Jenny S. That was a boat they bought from Mid-America. It was the old Mabel Kelts, and we ran that same coal run on it, and that's also, I guess, 89, I think, is when I went and got my first license, and I actually got the privilege of steering for a captain named Henry Kelly on there. He pushed me pretty hard to get into the steering program. I steered for him and a captain named Tolly Valentine, and that's where I got to. I tried hard to be a good mate for Henry, and Henry rewarded me, by helping me in the steering program.
I know you said as a kid you got to ride with your father a couple of times. Were there any big surprises once you got out there?
Oh yeah, a lot of big surprises. You would actually, I watched the crews and stuff, work on my dad's boat and stuff, and of course most of them was experienced crew members. They made the job just look easy, and then when you actually got out there and really saw, you're working You get down in New Orleans, it's 100 degrees in the shade at 10 o'clock at night. And, you worked in rain, sleet, snow, hail. It didn't matter, whatever. When there's work to do, you got out there and done it, and that was, you know, I listened to my dad tell story after story, and every time him and the two uncles got together, it was a big Riverman story, and you heard so many stories about decking careers the and especially all three of them being pilots. Even before I went out there, you would constantly hear stories, about bad places on the river and things that they done, locking rivers and all this stuff. And when you get out there, it's just so many things that you didn't expect. It was overwhelming at first, but like I said, I worked with an excellent crew. Just about every man on the first boat I rode, was very experienced and stuff, and it just made learning stuff easy, but it was still also a big challenge.
What about your first few trips up in the wheelhouse?
First few trips up in the wheelhouse, I asked myself what I'd got myself into. Again, Henry Kelly, I I believe he's still that I have rode with. He was the best lower river captain that I had ever rode with in my life. I saw him go down in all these turns and bends and stuff, northbound, southbound, never get out of his chair, sit there just calm as can be, and just really didn't expect all the stuff that was going on that he was watching do and how he's getting up and down the river. What, like I said, I just thought it was going to be, sit down in the chair, drive a little while and be turned loose and ready to go. But it was quite a challenge, and I appreciate everybody that helped me back in those days, because, back in those days, and I know you've heard it said too, a guy's bar book and his notes and what he done and how he done things, that was a sacred deal to those older guys and stuff. Get somebody to share your bar book or show you what they done or give you a helping hand up like that, it was a blessing.
Remind me, what eventually led you to Ingram?
Well, after Ingram bought out, Mid-South went to Tico Barge Line, which was just an intercompany switch, and then Mid-South went to United Barge Line, and then in June of 2012, Ingram bought out United Barge Line, and I just stayed with them as, carried on just like I'd never left any of the companies. They actually carried our time, which was a blessing also.
Where all did you run? I know you said some on the Ohio River, and then what landed you on the Illinois?
Well, I ran, we ended up, they Mid-South trained you they wanted you trained about everywhere they ran. So before I actually finished my steering career with Mid-South, I had actually I trained to run all the way down to New Orleans, and I ran from Metropolis, Illinois, all the way up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They made me ride a couple of trips up there. And then at the end of, I guess, my training career, they had just started running some boats up the Illinois River. And they put me on a boat named the Audrey Phelps. That was the most interesting boat I've ever rode in my career. And I think you've heard a guy named Michael Burkhart, old Beaver, talk about that Audrey Phelps. And that boat was all air steering. Everything on that boat was air. And if you got to messing around too much, you'd run yourself out of air and have to wait a minute before you could steer the thing again, because you had to wait for all the air compressors and stuff to build up pressure again before you could start steering and moving around again. So they sent me on that boat, and I started running up to Lamont, which is about as far as you can carry a boat that don't have a retractable wheelhouse on it. We ran all the way up to mile 300 on the Illinois River, and eventually that would be the boat that I got turned loose on.
You mentioned Beaver Burkhart. Tell me how you know him.
Beaver Burkhart and Beaver was in his learning. I guess, I don't know if he's actually in a steering program, but him and I was in the program about the same time. I guess I probably got turned loose a little bit before Beaver did. And back in his days of when he was on the Ann Peters, he mentioned riding on the Ann Peters, that him and I was in contact with each other a lot then. And then when they decided to send him up on the Illinois River, he told you about his very short posting time. He actually rode that up there with, I was running pilot, and I think at the time probably Cletus Smith was running captain, and Beaver came over there and rode with us. And as his time went on, when he got turned loose as pilot on that Audrey Fouts, that him and I relieved each other the whole time that he rode that Illinois River. And just a great fella. I can't say enough, good about him. He was a good relief and a good friend, and still is. I consider Beaver to still be we don't stay in contact as much these days, but I really enjoyed riding with him.
And you said you knew Billy Watkins too,
yeah,
huh?
Billy Watkins ran second mate for me. I believe it was on the Jenny S that we rode together quite a bit over there. And again, him and I don't know how long, probably 2 years or so, year or two, Billy and I rode together. And he's made a great career for himself too. I think he rides on one of the lower boats now. But Billy and I rode quite a bit together. Good man.
Deal. Yeah, I've got him booked coming up here pretty soon too. Tell me about running the Illinois.
The Illinois is one of I won't say it's the most challenging, because every river's got its challenges, but if you can picture a mud puddle with trying to carry 15 barges up it, your head's on one bank, your stern's on the other one, and you're digging for everything you got. It's a narrow, shallow, twisty river that's a real challenge to run. And I had a great teacher up there named Jerry King, and that he was a man that knew that he was one of the smoothest operators up there on that river I've ever rode with, and a good teacher. But he was one of those teachers that could really teach you every bad spot, every turn, everything. And he took a lot of time. I rode with him. It would have been my last little bit over a year. I rode that river with him. And I mean, he just really helped me through the narrow lot. The bridges are real narrow up there. It's like the upper without the current, but there's a lot of narrow bridges, tight bends, and little locks and stuff. And it's a beautiful river to run, but not a lot of people like to run it.
I think you told me it kind of keeps you on your toes up there, so the hitches kind of go by.
Yeah, they go by pretty quick. I'll mention somebody else. Even after I got turned loose, and I think you heard Beaver talk about this guy, was a mate named J.C. Campbell. And I believe he was the best mate that I've ever rode with in my life. Another quick story about that Audrey Fouts days. We talked about J.C. Campbell. I guess I should mention he had a second mate, the guy riding second mate, Tom McCarver. He was every bit as good as J.C. Campbell was on getting into locks through bridges and stuff. And he rode second mate until he went out on his own, learned to be a, he went through the training period and stuff, and he's now my pilot on the Dale Heller. I ride the Dale Heller on the Illinois River. And just to show you how time comes back around, Tom McCarver's now my pilot. So, it's great stories out there.
It's a small world. What do you think about this little project I'm doing here?
I love it. I love it. I've subscribed to your channel and I'm watching as many of them as I can. And, just these are stories that die. And we've told my son, that's one thing I've told my son, there's stories that dad has told my boys, every time my dad got around my boy and stuff, he would always tell a river story. And I said, son, you better write these down because these are stories that made the history of the river, and what you're doing is a living recording of some of the old stories and stuff that's going on. What made the river great, what makes river people great, the jobs we do and stuff. And I give you hats off. I mean, I really enjoy everything and I hope you keep it up.
That is the plan. Actually, one future guest said to give him about 5 years. So I guess I have to keep this up at least that long.
Well, there you go. Well, there's a lot of them up there you can interview because I tell you what, there's some unbelievable river stories out there. I listened to Mike Burkhart Beaver, and there's no way that I could ever tell a story as good as his. And just everybody, all the stories that's been told, it brings back memories. A lot of these stories, you and I've tried this a couple of times before, and every time that we done this, I listened to Beaver, I listened to Orrin, I listened to a bunch of them, and it all brings back stories that if I could sit here and just remember them, we could talk for hours, and just stories of working with the people, Mike, Billy, Tom McCarver, all the captains and stuff I rode with over the years. It's a never ending story. And my dad and my uncles, when they got together, I told my son, I wish I'd wrote down some of the stories that they've told back in these days, because you just can't remember stuff like that the rest of your life. You forget it. And these are old stories, like I said, that made the river. It made the Riverman. And it's the stories that I tell the people that I'm training, when we're going up and down the river, I'm telling him stories that Jerry King told me, that Michael Burkhart made, that Tom McCarver's made. It's stories that you pass on, and it's a great career. It's a great life.
Well, I'm glad what I'm doing is as well received as it has been. I'm going to keep at it.
Well, please do, Tim. We appreciate it.
Roger that, Cap.
And I just want to, thank Kenny Brown for his maritime throwdown deal, because a lot of the mates back in the old day, JC could catch when you was going into the lock. He would get you in there. He could catch a line. He could throw a line, and he was real avid about having all the deck crew. That was a big deal on Sunday afternoon. They would get back there and throw lines, and I have seen them do it. A quarter throw. Back in those days, he really challenged everybody. And the maritime throwdown, kudos. If we can get those old timey, and I don't say the mates today can't throw a line like JC did or anything like that, but I'm sure they can. But this is a lost art that we don't need to be lost. To have a competent mate to get you into locks and through bridges and stuff like that, if the maritime throwdown program will give them a heads up, it's one great deal. I love seeing it.
Are you involved in it?
No, I'm not, and I probably need to get a little bit more involved than I am. And try to get my crews. I've got one guy on my boat that's been in it, and I'm actually training him right now to be a pilot. I've got a pilot trainee, and he's been involved in it quite a bit. And that's where I've been getting a lot of my information on really what the program is and how it's done. So that will be something that I'm looking into as time goes by. We'll be looking more into getting more involved in it, or at least, supporting it a lot better than I do.
Sure, great to hear. What is well, I know you've, of course, you're been called the Godfather of the Illinois, but what's been your favorite place to run, or the prettiest place you've ever been?
Well, the prettiest place, not the Ohio River's pretty and stuff like that, but if I was to give the one prettiest place that I like running, would be crossing Peoria Lake at the sunset or sunrise. It's on a day that it's not windy. It's one of the most peaceful places that you can ever go across. It's still a shallow, narrow lake, and you don't meet a lot of boats and stuff out there, but just a beautiful sunrise up there and stuff. You just can't beat it. But I guess I've been on the Illinois River so long, I'm partial to it. I I just don't want to go nowhere else. I believe I'd be happy finishing my career out right there, because I've rode the river so long. It's like I tell my pilot trainee, if you walk on a path that's from, you know, a 30-mile path, and you walk it every day, eventually you're going to learn every stick, stump, bump, and hump in it. And I've been on the Illinois River so long, that's the way I feel about it. I've learned it, and I've just by repetitive going up and down it, I've got very comfortable with running up and down that river.
Well, speaking of finishing out your career, do you have retirement on the horizon yet? It's 40 years right now, right?
Yeah, 40 years. I will probably work. I mean, I'm only 58. I will probably have to work, 3 or 4, 5 more years. I really don't want to work until 65, but it'll all be according to what the good Lord has in plans for me. If I can retire earlier, I'd sure like to, but if I have to keep working, I'm good with that too. Because, Ingram's a great place to work, great company. They treat us well. And, I still enjoy driving a boat. I really do. Driving a boat up and down the river is just, a passion of mine. But as far as, a lot of the stuff is getting harder, and keeping up with the paperwork and policies and all this. But I'll work as long as I'm comfortable, and then I'll give it to some of the younger guys. I've got
Any big plans for your retirement?
fishing. I'm an avid fisherman. I live up on Bullshoes Lake in northwest Arkansas, and I'm a big walleye fisherman. I love fishing, camping. I think I mentioned to you I'm out here actually sitting in my camper today. Just we love. I try to keep up what my dad showed me when I was a kid. I'm trying to take my wife, and I took my son. My son's 26 now, so he's out on his own and stuff. But I've tried to treat them the way my dad treated me. Show them the country, travel, fish, hunt, whatever we can get into.
Is your son your only child?
Yes, I've just got the one son, and he's like I said, he's 26, and he worked for Arkansas Missouri Railroad. It runs out of Springdale, Arkansas, and it's just the short line railroad that runs from Fort Smith, Arkansas up to Monett, Missouri. And he does many jobs over there. He either works on the train, or he's got him they let him work in the office quite a bit, dispatching the trains and stuff. So he's got a pretty good job.
Well, it's pretty fantastic. Do you have any final words, any message for the industry?
Well, I just, it's a good job. for the younger generation and stuff like that, I encourage people to, if you really want a job and you can make a career out of this, but don't expect the career to come to you. These people trying to get in the engine room, trying to get in the pilot house to do the job I am, it's a hard market to get into. And keep your faith up, encourage people. Like I said, the maritime throwdown, be the best that you can be at any job that you do. It's a blessed job out there. You can make a career out of it, and it will be a good one. And I appreciate all that the companies that I've worked for has done for me and stuff. And just keep your head up and keep working.
Well, Captain Coy, I thank you again for how many times this has been now. I think 5, but that'll do it for the questions, and we'll keep in touch with you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you having me again.
All right, sir. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.